elevator pitch.
Behave. So in the case of like selling a bottle of Coca-Cola, Coca-Cola has to report their scope 3 based off of consumers if they're going to litter or if they're going to recycle. And of course, depending on where you are in the world, there's different probabilities associated with this. And for electricity, it depends on which power plant you're getting your energy from. So the regulation's heating up, and we're a two-tiered solution. One is a TurboTax for carbon emissions, and two is to hook into all the ERPs so that we can calculate the emissions in real time. So AI is really needed to help to compute the scope 3, and Web3 is kind of more like the icing on the cake, but by enabling users to connect their crypto wallets, we're enabling ability to purchase carbon credits directly through the software. So after tracking all of the emissions that are associated with the product, the company then has the ability to buy carbon credits and to go net zero all through software. So thanks so much. We're looking for co-founders, as particularly those that are interested in sustainability, those that believe in climate change, and also those that potentially can open up enterprise clients in order to proceed. And just FYI, I already have our first beta customer who's agreed to do the carbon emission reporting with Carbon Trace, and also was accepted into a UI UX accelerator called Avocademy, where we're in the process of getting our MVP and looking to report through CDP, Carbon Disclosure Project, by the end of the year. So thanks so much, and I hope to connect with you soon.
Thanks, Paul. We'll share this announcement through listserv. Maybe you can find some co-founders through that. But thank you. I think the next I want to bring up Kenneth to pitch his idea. You get 2 minutes, please.
Would it be okay if I share a slide?
Sure.
With you?
Yep. You have access, I'm sure.
So yeah, in Denmark with a group of other people, we are working on this project called ObGyn. So let me just give you one slide of what we're doing. So we are in the market of detecting burnout and then providing targeted interventions. So one can think of how do you go from sort of a state of well-being to a state of burnout. And there's many ways you can sort of quantify this and you can think about this, but one way at least is this stairway here. So you might find yourself with some excessive drive or ambition that makes you push harder, you work on weekends, you maybe displace conflict. And then sometimes maybe you can relate to some of this is that you sort of postpone personal events. So you might have a family event or friends going out on a weekend, but you say, I'll stay at the office because I have some work that I need to be done. And that's often perfectly okay. The problem is that if you sort of keep pushing on and if you keep having this sort of sense of urgency that now I need to do some extra work because there's so much to do, you're in the risk zone of going down to this latter stages here where you sort of deny and you withdraw and you sort of move yourself away from the life that you would normally have. Keeping going downwards here, you're at risk of the latter stage here. So the project that we are in is that we want to sort of be moving up here where we detect the signs of burnout before it's going to be bad. And there's quite good research evidence that it's easier for you to bounce back again. But the problem is that often you have a hard time detecting that because questionnaires, which is the common way to do it, they're somewhat unreliable because of this, that you deny and you withdraw and you sort of don't realize it yourself before it's actually there. I can have some more slides I can share with you how and why this is possible. So yeah, this is sort of the underlying idea that we argue that we have some ways of detecting it earlier and then provide targeted interventions based on that. So currently we're in the process of finding investors and also our customers. We have some quite good dialogues going on, but we're of course also interested in opening up new possibilities. Thanks.
Our first speaker today is Dr. Yana Aznavour. Dr. Yana Aznavour is the founder of Endometrics, and she's also the CEO. She spent the first decade at the forefront of endometriosis treatment and research, from clinical management to cutting-edge surgical techniques and award-winning molecular research. After completing a PhD and working as a clinical advisor for biotech startups in the Bay Area, she founded Endometrics, a company devoted to transforming women's healthcare, starting with a non-invasive diagnostic test for endometriosis, a very painful condition. Yana is the youngest recipient of the Jordan Phillips Award for the best research in minimally invasive gynecology by the American Association of Gynecologic Laparoscopists. She has an extensive background in clinical medicine, medical genetics, leading multidisciplinary teams within international collaboration and clinical trials, and is the author of peer-reviewed papers and patents. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation, Yana. And the floor is yours. We wanted to hear your story.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. You pretty much told my story. So yeah, I'll just briefly cover that. So yeah, I'm a Ph.D. in ObGyn, gynecological surgeon, and I worked in a clinical setting primarily. I left clinical practice just 3 years ago. So I worked in surgical department many years, and I realized that out of 2,000 patients, the majority of them have endometriosis. And this is the most enigmatic women's disease, actually, and we don't have diagnostic tests available on market. And the only option we can use as a surgeons is to do laparoscopy, actually, invasive procedure. And when surgery is considered the gold standard for diagnosis of the disease, it will be avoided at any circumstances. Women would love to avoid surgery, physicians would love to avoid surgery, and it's never will be a first call for the diagnosis. So that's why I decided to actually dive in genetic and molecular aspects of this disease to develop a non-invasive solution for these women. But I started with minimal invasive solution, and this was my first mistake. I'll tell you more about that a bit later. So when I was working as a clinical advisor, that's how I decided actually to build a company. So I realized that many biotech companies, medtech companies, they share the common mistakes. They talk to the wrong stakeholders. They do not know how to, conduct clinical trials to receive really great results, and they don't understand patient needs. That's really strange to hear about medtech startups, but they do not talk to patients a lot. They do not talk to the right physicians a lot. And that's why I also realized that there is no clinical persons on the C-suite in many successful, not so successful biotech companies. So I decided to actually build a company and build a product around the data we had during the last 7 years of research. So in a research mode, we developed biomarkers that specifically targets endometrial cells, so we can effectively differentiate endometrial cells of women with endometriosis from those without, completely healthy controls, or women with other pathologies. And we developed a test based on endometrial biopsy. So it's minimally invasive when compared to large major surgery. And as a surgeon, I saw that that would be an amazing solution for patients out there. But after that, we talked to patient organizations, a lot of student organizations, different societies, women's clubs, and we realized that even those women who suffer from pelvic pain for many years, even up to 80 years, they would love to avoid any kind of invasive procedures. So that's how, actually, based on the feedback from potential customers, we decided to upgrade the test, and we are now developing a test based on menstrual blood analysis. So we are extracting individual cells from menstrual blood, which makes the whole patient experience way more cooler and comfortable for women. They just collect menstrual blood at home, send the sample to our lab, and that's pretty much it. We release the result in less than a week. So I founded a company last year. We are super early stage, but we've been accepted to UC Berkeley Skydeck Accelerator last summer. And after that, we raised pre-seed round and opened our lab space at Baker Labs at UC Berkeley campus just recently, last month. And we started beta testing of our kit. We have volunteers, we partnered with patient organizations, and many women are sending us their samples so we can actually finalize the product development and bring this first diagnostic product to market next year. And yeah, so and as my challenge. I actually applied to many accelerators before we got accepted to Skydec. I applied to Y Combinator and IndieBio, many biotech ones, but we've been rejected. But it was really interesting to hear the feedback from experienced people in the biotech field, and we always upgraded something in our deck, in our pipeline, in our team, even after we received feedback from each of them. And also, thanks to Skydec, we now have amazing business advisory board. As you can tell, I have no business experience, which is really a huge challenge for me. And our business advisory board guides me through this journey, and they help me a lot. And we plan to hire for sure a CBO, but after we close seed round, hopefully this fall. So that's a brief cover of what we are doing, and I would love to answer maybe targeted questions.
Great. Thank you for sharing that story. Before we go into any targeted questions, I just wanted to dig a bit deeper into your journey. You were this like medical doctor, surgeon, a little more comfortable life than an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
What was the decision like? Like, did you talk to people like, hey, I'm trying to leave this profession of mine, go become a founder? And what did people respond? And both the yes and the no, and how did you decide that it's worth pursuing this idea?
I actually didn't ask anyone if I should leave clinical practice to start a company. I just did that. I love clinical work and I love helping patients. I love surgeries and so on. But I realized that I'm doing the same automatically, same work every day, and it's not evolving too much. We have new instruments, we have new techniques, but we cannot help a lot of patients in a new way. Patients with endometriosis will still undergo repeated surgeries, the same ones, and it never changes. So that's why I decided to try to help more women. In clinical practice, you can help several thousands of women, but if we will successfully implement this diagnostic test, we will be able to help millions of them. So that was worth it.
Yeah. And what has the fundraising experience been so far? Like, did you have any preconceived notions of how hard or easy it was going to be? And what was the reality like so far?
Yeah, I knew it will be hard for me because I never asked for money. I did all the research. I sponsored all the research based on personal research grants, and that's pretty much it. So I just received awards and reinvested this money into the research. But turns out it's really hard to be a female founder, to be a first-time founder, and to try to fundraise for femtech startup, because the majority of VCs are, of course, men, and we are all the time explaining what this condition means and why women suffer for 8 years before they actually receive a diagnosis of endometriosis. It seems really strange, stupid, and many men do not understand this. So we spend a lot of time just explaining the condition and explaining the problem, that it's there and the patients actually need this product. And also, it's hard to be a female founder. You're always questioned how you will run a company, what if you will get pregnant, and so on. So very feminine questions. And as you might see, on the pitch book, statements, only 2% of VC-backed startups have female founders. So that's pretty much insane. It's still challenging to fundraise. But we closed pre-seed and we are starting seed fundraising. So hopefully we'll success in that as well.
Yeah, that's just crazy. Maybe a question about the investors. Have you approached female investors? Have they been any different in terms of their response and support that you've been getting when compared to male investors?
Yeah, that for sure. We have 5 investors now, and 3 of them are women. So they really believe in you, and they know that women are actually better in time management, so they can run a company if they understand what's going on and what they're building. So yeah.
Well, and time management, like what is the biggest challenge in terms of managing time as a startup founder? What is the toughest part, and like how do you deal with those things?
So after working in a clinical setting where you have a strict schedule, although there was no work-life balance at all in surgery, I worked from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. Till the last patient recovers. It was a bit frustrating. How should I, create my own schedule? How should I manage my employees? Oh my God, I have employees now. So that's pretty much crazy for a first-time founder. But at the end of the day, you just create a schedule and start from there.
Yeah.
You
And
just, yeah.
yeah, thank you for that. And one other question is like, you find advisors all over the place in the Bay Area. And like, how did you pick your advisors? Like, was there a framework that you're using in terms of like, these are the things that work for me? And how did you pick them actually?
So I didn't create a clinical advisory board because I have clinical experience, but recently I got this feedback from seed VCs that we need clinical advisory board. So I just reached out to my network of gynecological surgeons and endometriosis specialists, and I just asked them to join. And when we're talking about business advisory board, I was looking for those who built diagnostics companies before, who actually understand the life cycle of biotech companies, because many VCs, they are looking for financial projections for the next 5 years. They're looking for commercialization pathway, and we are saying that we need more research, we need more clinical trials, and you always need to explain that you cannot commercialize a product when it's not ready. And that would be stupid, and that would be strange for me as a clinician to actually do that. So yeah, I was looking for advisors who did that successfully, who have pretty amazing exits, and who understand this journey.
Yeah, see, Heather Koshinsky is on your board.
Sorry?
Heather Koshinsky, I think she's one of your board members.
Heather, yeah, she's amazing. She's the head
wonderful.
of our board. Yeah,
she's wonderful. She's great. And you mentioned financial projections. I'm asking these questions because I think these are the things we don't think about as scientists. When you start a company, these investors want a 5-year projection. As you said, it takes time to get to define the product, and then all people want, like, what is this product going to look like, and how much the sales are going to be, and all this stuff. How did you deal with that? Like, how do you respond to the investors? And because we have nothing at this point, and for somebody who's trying to start a company and trying to create this pitch decks, and they're trying to put numbers in there, fictitious numbers. What are the things that work for you?
You just go with the best assumption. I always state that I will not commercialize and bring product to market when I'm not 100% sure that it works. Because, when I was advising startups, I saw products on the market that have no validation, no clinical validation, that don't actually work, but they are on the market and patients are paying for that. So that's pretty much insane, and I will never do that, even if it will cost me several more years of struggling in fundraising. But so I will be 100% sure that this product works when I will actually launch it. But you make a best guess how much this test will cost you to run. If you will do 100 tests, for example, if you will pay lab for 100 tests or 1,000 tests, how much PCR costs when compared to RNA sequencing, for example. And also you need to analyze statistics. How many patients with these conditions are there? How many patients need triage? How many patients can be screened? How many clinics are there? How many physicians you can reach out to and distribute your test? So you just pick these numbers from the statistically publicly available data and just try to make some best guess. Right. But it's not a detailed financial projection for sure. At a super early stage, it's unreal to have a realistic ones.
Yeah. And before we go to the next speaker, one last question is like, what is the biggest mistake you think you did so far, if you've corrected that and others should not commit, in your opinion?
I did a lot, I guess. So maybe first it's creating a research pipeline, not a pipeline that actually makes sense for commercialization of the product. And actually our advisory board helped me a lot to shift my mindset in this let's say, field. And because I always, wanted to do additional research, add additional cohort of patients, compare with another pathologist, check, different biomarkers, and they always stop me like, this will not help us to commercialize this particular product. So you need to think about commercialization first, not about additional papers, additional patents. You need to think about final product and actually bringing this to market. And also, second mistake, it's I would say, I was stuck at diagnostic test based on endometrial biopsy, and I thought that this will be really beneficial for patients. And I didn't talk to many patient organizations first. I would need to do that, and that would save me a couple of years for sure. And third one, I would say I didn't listen to this common phrase, hire slow, fire fast, and I hired pretty fast. But we fired this person in a couple of months because that was insane. Really, that was not a perfect match, and I just, I was in a rush. So now I hire pretty slow.
Yeah, that's great advice. That's great advice. Thank you so much. We'll come back to you during the panel discussion, but thank you. And moving along with the next speaker, we have Lali Shayeste from the IPRO office. Lali is the Director of Intellectual Property and Administration in the Office of Technology Licensing, where she develops UC Berkeley's IP strategy and oversees licensing for life sciences, chemistry, medical instruments, physical sciences, engineering, software technologies, and artificial intelligence. Lali also handles trademark and copyright matters and open source compliance. Additionally, she works with sister offices on IP matters for government grants and contracts, foundation grants and contracts, and sponsored research agreements. Lali is trained as a scientist and worked for several years in research before practicing law. Prior to joining UC Berkeley, she performed population genetics research at Stanford, pediatric brain tumor research and ovarian cancer research at UCSF, brain tumor research at University of Chicago, and comparative genomics research at Exelixis. She then embarked on a law career and became a patent agent at Exelixis, followed by a director of IP and assistant general counsel for IP matters at SRI. Without further ado, thank you, Lali, for joining us today. The floor is yours.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for having me. I thought I'd share a few slides. I want to make it really, really short, and I really invite questions. Our office is involved with taking in IP, intellectual property of different forms, and then trying to license them out. And we look over all aspects of this activity. May I share my screen?
Yes, please.
Okay. So intellectual property and licensing for startups. If I am boring you to this, just let me know, but otherwise, ask away. We define intellectual property. I like to define intellectual property is as whatever is in between the two ears, but it is all sorts of information, know-how, trade secrets, data, design process, software inventions, nucleic acid methods, programs, work of authorship, trademarks, and inventions. Now, at a university, we don't deal with know-how and trade secrets because we are not commercial entities. We publish everything. But if you're a startup, know-how and trade secrets are actually really important to you. Intellectual properties, especially since you're startups or starting, also include the list of your employees. They're actually pretty important. There are different ways of protecting intellectual property. One of them are, just as I noted, trade secrets, know-how, which are things that you keep to yourself. Copyrights, which protect expression, not ideas. Everything, so it needs to be something that needs to be already expressed. It could include dances, it could include books, it could include publications, and of course, software code. Trademarks, which protect brands, such as the UC Berkeley brand, and patents, which protect inventions. But the other way to protect IP is actually in the form of agreements. Let's say that as investigators, as startups, you have ideas that are not completely baked, right? Not ready to go out. However, you do need to work with others in order to bring these ideas into fruition. And so and you haven't filed any applications because you're not ready to file a patent application. So it becomes really important to enter into agreements such as non-disclosure agreements. If you are into inventions, anything under the sun that's modified by a human, that's novel, non-obvious, or useful can be patented. A patent needs to teach a person that is like yourself. They call it ordinary skill in the art on how to make and use the invention. If you are into patents, this particular group, if you're into deep tech, not necessarily patents. However, I will let you know that if you have deep tech, I can put a patent behind it. But most of the time, you probably don't deal with, as in deep tech, with patents. However, patents take a very long time and are very expensive avenues to get to for a protection. So if you're entering into, if you decide to patent something, you need to be careful with the costs. You need to also really rein in your outside counsel. I have seen many a startup that basically is sucked dry by their outside patent counsel. I'm always happy to advise you if you're interested in patenting patent applications, or how to rein in and be careful on patenting costs. A patent from the time that is originally filed to the time that is issued, depending on the technology, takes anywhere between 3 to 10 years. And it can cost, depending again on the technology, anywhere between $20,000 to over $100,000 per country. And those are usually the biology patents that are the most expensive, and simple devices, not difficult devices, that are usually between $20,000 to $30,000. You need to review carefully when you want to patent something. Is it, first of all, you want to make sure that you understand the patent value. Is it fundamental? Is it something that you can actually enforce? Does it have business value? Meaning that what benefits are you providing that is different from everybody else, right? And what business models are you going to have in order to get to your commercial place, right? And is it technically sound? Does it actually work, right? And legal matters. You have to be really, really careful to, first of all, make sure that you do have all the commercial rights. And secondly, that you haven't already given away the boat, meaning that you haven't already talked about it with others without any type of agreement, or you haven't talked about it before filing an application on it, right? You need to be careful that the technology, just because you have invented a new technology, that doesn't mean that there's a need in the marketplace for it. And I'll put a plug for the ObGyn website and also the I-Corps programs and a lot of different programs around campus that help you with your ideas, with your technologies, to see if there's an actual market for your technology, because competition for important needs are always fierce. So you need to always focus on your unique benefits, not just what your approach is to trying to get somewhere. And if you were to patent something, you need to think about the strategy that your industry has or needs in a patent. So for example, if you were in the chemicals, instruments, or bio, you want to have monopoly, versus if you're in the software, internet, AI, all you want is to have leverage so that you can go after others if somebody is really infringing on what you have. If you have a patent, or if you're interested in licensing a technology from a university, since we are all in a university, we have, there are different ways of taking a technology out of university, and they all depend on the stage that the technology is at. When the technology is really early on, which is almost all the time what happens at a university, we start with just evaluating an opportunity and a simple letter agreement, which is a one-page agreement that we allow our licensees to have. So this would be for any university, like a letter agreement, a very simple document which then goes to probably a license agreement. These simple documents, such as letter agreements, would play a critical role for you if you are trying to grab SBIR, STTR funding, or different types of government funding, or you're trying to attract first-time VCs because they want to know that you do have some handle on the technology, especially if it's coming out of a university. And I have the different types of agreements that I provided here. And the last is to make sure that you all know about the Berkeley Begin website, because it has a wealth of information, courses, and also different avenues, including even free legal help if you were interested for your company. Thank you. Any questions?
Lale, thank you so much. That's a lot of information. We're going to share this presentation, so if anybody needs this, they can always review this. You've seen a lot of startups go through your office. We ought to hear some fun stories, because you mentioned how a startup went dry just dealing with IP attorneys off campus. Maybe you have a story or two in terms of like lessons people should keep in mind while picking an IP attorney.
So one of the things that I've always stressed with everyone, including all of the startups, right, is, and it's a practice that I do myself. I never, ever go to large law firms, ever. And it's because they don't live to keep you happy. They live to make money for themselves, right? So be really careful who you're choosing as your counsel, both for filing applications and also for negotiating license agreements. Large firms tend to really suck you dry, and that's so one of the, and I shall name no names, but one of the startups that we had started with a big bang, got a massive attorney, and 2 years later they were $4 million in the hole. Right? And they have never been able to get out of that. They had to pivot, they had to do completely something else, and this is an awesome technology, actually. So they have pivoted. They're trying to do the best they can, and they will be successful. But now they finally came around to what I had said a bunch of years ago. In complete contrast, those who did listen have done quite well. And I also wanted to say, Yana, to your point and to your question, Naresh, women founders have the toughest time, and numbers after numbers have shown that they, VCs completely ignore them most of the time. VCs do not give them money, so it has been really difficult. So my hat is always off to my women founders, because they work super hard to get to commercialization.
Yeah, it's hard. I'm sure Yana has seen it firsthand. You must have heard a lot of stories, Lale. One related question, we have all these incubators on campus, accelerators, and you see law firms, big names show up on the top of the list.
Exactly.
Is the university doing anything? Because we should be a little more conscious of like how we support our founders. Knowingly, if we know that if you go with the big law firm route, they're going to be in the hole. Most of them do, because it's just billing, right? As you said, like I was talking to one of the biggest and the largest law firms, and just for incorporation, they're talking about $25,000. I'm like, you just print a paper and put the name on a startup. Okay. Why do they need to charge $25,000? I never get it. But just going back to your point, like, can the university do something about like safeguarding these founders early stage, because they don't know anything? They're like, oh, it's a free law firm for you. Go work with them.
Exactly, right? We give you $10,000 worth of free work, which is about 20 minutes, literally.
Yeah, basically.
They advertise, they bring and advertise their services to the university, and most and I'm trying to be really careful with my words. So,
yes, I'm not naming.
Most of the structures on campus that do know these law firms, but they don't know probably what the law firms charge. So recently, what I have been doing is I'm actually trying to work with smaller law firms and ask them to provide services. So we do have, I have added, I think 1 or 2 of them, at least one, actually 2 of them that are willing to provide incorporation services, and also negotiating licenses, and also patent prosecution help. And their charges are not nearly as much as what the large law firms charge. And one of them actually are Berkeley alums. Yes, so I'm trying, there's not a huge impetus for us, everybody say, whatever, good luck to them. But to me, I do care, actually. I do care how the startups do.
Yeah, no, thank you for that plug-in. I'll take it in a different question in terms of, like, if you're a scientist, right, you're doing your research, the first time that idea comes to your head that maybe there's some meat in this, maybe there's a product I can make, if there's a pathway for them to follow in terms of filing patent, when should they approach you? And one of the questions was asked on Eventbrite was, if I'm a non-PI on a research project and generate this data, and if I want to start a company and not my PI, how would that work?
Okay, so for the first one, come to us as early as humanly possible. Right? Don't be scared of us. Come to us. It's very easy. And we will file a patent application. Our resistance level to a very first application is none. So I'm always happy to file that first provisional application without a question, because I do have law firms that are really, really inexpensive and will do a great job that we have negotiated numbers with. So we can do that, right? That's first one. And then the second one, let me make sure that I'm getting the question correctly. Are you asking if there is a potential possible dispute between the PI and...
a potential, take it that way, yeah.
Okay, well, that's actually the really easy one, right? Inventorship is not like publication, right? When you write a publication or you write a paper, you name everybody in the lab, including the person who washes dishes, right? And you thank everybody, plus, but inventorship is a definition of law. Inventor is a person who conceives, like actually comes up with the idea of an invention, and that conception gets reflected in a claim of a patent. That's it. So if the person is the one who actually, so if the researcher is the one, and we do have a lot of patent applications where the researchers are inventors only and not the PIs. If there is ever a dispute, they feel forced, their future is in the hands of the PI, right? I know that all, right?
It's a power dynamic, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If there is a worry, they do need to reach out. It doesn't have to be, with their PI, but they do need to reach out to us confidentially. And it's very easy. We just put out the outside counsel on top of them, right? Outside counsel will come and ask, these are the claims I have written. PI, which claim did you conceive? And if the PI cannot come up with that claim that they conceived, then the PI will not be an inventor. That's easy.
Yeah, I think
that's the part that doesn't hurt, but I do know the power dynamics, and I do understand the worry completely.
Yeah, I think this kind of message need to be like amplified, because people are, scared of even bringing it up. They don't know who to go to. But I think I work with your office, first-hand beneficiary of such dealings. I encourage everybody to reach out as soon as possible. One question about licensing. Is there a cost factor that need to keep in mind? How does the university negotiate in terms if a founder doesn't have any money at the early stages? Most of them don't in a deep tech startup.
Nobody does, right?
Yeah.
Well, if you have a lot of money when you're a startup, then hats off to you. But I don't know which, where your money is coming from. But more than 99% of my startups are individuals, students who literally, and I'm, before COVID, literally come sit across from me and bring out their own checkbooks. So yes, most of them don't have any money. So, and that's why the luck of the draw is that university actually provides really early stage technologies, right? So they're not going to be expensive. And if we are entering into a very first agreement where we say, startup, we are going to keep this, we're going to keep this technology for you for 1 year in exchange for small money. And then after 1 year, we will talk again, right? And those we call them letter agreements. They're one-page option agreements, literally. And they only cost, depending on the technology again, right? Anywhere I've charged people $200, $300, or $1,000 for 1 year. That's nothing.
Wow.
That's even for a startup. That's not a lot of money.
Yeah.
It gets serious when the startup actually starts to have VC interest. There is some basic funding, and they do want to enter into a license agreement now, right? Or angel funding. Now they want to enter into a license agreement, and our license agreements are like any other license agreements. All of our templates are online template agreements. So you always know what you're going to get into, right? And what we do, right? So we engage with this one VC who is a VC that came out of universities and only puts money into universities. They're called Osage University Partners. Everybody knows them, right? And what they have is a massive database. Because they only put money into universities, they have a massive database of technologies that are very similar to the technologies, for example, that our startups have. So I pick a telephone. It's sort of like a little bit of a mafia thing, right? I pick up the call, I say, well, can you give me the numbers for I have this technology. Can you give me the numbers? And so they basically provide us with the numbers. They say, okay, if we have had 20 of these of very similar technologies in the past 10 years, this is the 25th percentile, 50th, and 75th percentile of all the numbers that, for example, the startups have paid to the university. And so if you end up with me, I usually tend to charge really towards the 25th percentile because I want us to be successful. I want the startup to be successful, and I want a fair deal for both of us, literally. But a license agreement has all the regular terms of any license agreement, including patent costs. But because they're startups, so this last sentence, because they're startups, we are really easy on the earlier parts of the money. So for example, we charge very small for license initiation fee, but we take a bite out at the end. So we take equity in a company, and we really like equities in our startups.
Fair. I have done a podcast with Osage University partners, Manny Stockman. If anybody is interested, I put the link in the channel here. And maybe I'll end this conversation here with the most common mistakes the founders have done, especially regarding IP issues and dealing with the IP office, things that others could avoid, or if there are any best practices in your mind.
Yes, you remember one of the PDF, not PDF, one of these PowerPoints was look at what, be very careful about what your technology is and what you're trying to achieve, right? So I've had one of the biggest issues that I do see is, for example, a startup that tries to, for example, we are prosecuting applications, right? The first application is a provisional, the next one is an international, the next one, now we have to go into specific countries. All of a sudden, their outside counsel tells them that you need to go in like 40 different countries in the world, which makes zero sense.
Yeah.
It is so extraordinarily expensive that they do lose a heck of a lot of money. They do not. So the first question I always have when my startups want to do an international or a national, basically country filing, are you really willing to go into that country to defend your patent? And if you go to defend, so let's say, and I'm just going to pull a number out of my hat. Let's say that you go to Caracas, right? Venezuela, you want to go. Take your patent into Venezuela, and somebody is infringing your patent into Venezuela. Are you going to want to spend time and money in Venezuela to protect your patent? If not, don't file there. Period, right? So be very, very careful. And also, depending on the technology, if you're chip technology, yes, Korea is a given. Mm-hmm. But if you are, for example, a chip technology, perhaps, Africa may not be, or different African or Middle Eastern and Northern African countries may not be your best bet into prosecution.
Yeah, that's such a hard question, I think. Attorneys come and say, you need to have the protection in all the countries, and paying for them is expensive. As you mentioned, how do you file in China or not? What have the best entrepreneurs done in terms of going down that framework, right? If they had to choose other than chip companies? If there's a diagnostic startup or a therapeutic startup, what have they done, for example?
So we talk about it, right? The best ones come and talk with us, right? Which countries should we go to? Well, okay, where is your technology, your device going to be manufactured, and where is it going to be most sold? Those are probably where you want to protect them the most, including the US, of course, right? Especially if it was government funded, 1,000,000%, you have to go into US these days. That's not even a question. So come talk to us. And then when they ask for more than 2 or 3, let's say they ask for 10, I say, okay, let's see how much the prices for each country is going to be just to file, right? And then the numbers become very real. And then we start to go back and stand back. And I'm like, okay, now think again, which countries specifically do you want to go into? And then that's basically how we start slicing and dicing until we get to number of countries that they're happy with and we are happy with. And I know we have a VC on the line here, but a lot of the times VCs don't care, how many different countries you're in, as long as you have patent protection. And so at the end of the day, I have had one company, actually a therapeutics entity that was only being prosecuted in the US, only the US. That one has an exit of $200 million, just in the US, not worldwide. So this is just an example for you to know. You don't need to be all over the world to get a good exit or to have success.
That's good. I think one of the points I'd like to reiterate is these are deep tech companies. It takes so long to come to the market. If you're successful, technology might be acquired pretty soon rather than go to the market by yourself. I think that's the other thing you got to keep in mind and play accordingly. We have a question from the audience, Milad. He said, what kind of equity do you take?
That's a great question. And I'm not going to answer that. And why is that? It's because we need a commercialization plan. I need to understand. So any of us, right? We need to understand how your plan or how your commercialization plan is, what your commercialization plan is, right? Let's say that you're trying to commercialize something that is, that the world sells $3 trillion of, but your market sector of it is going to be $300,000 at most. I'm not going to charge you the same equity that I would have charged you if you said, I'm taking on the entire $300 billion, right? Those are different equity calculations for us. So we are also very careful, depending on your commercialization plan. Again, we will come up with something, and the numbers that Osage gave me, right? I come up with something closer to the 25th percentile to keep you happy and to keep me happy as well.
Cool. Thank you. Hopefully that was helpful. Ale, we'll come back to discussion afterwards. We'll open up the floor, but we are going to our last speaker today, Ali Madani. All right. We have Ali, who is the founder and CEO of Profluent Bio, an AI startup in protein design based in Berkeley, California. Previously, he led machine learning research initiatives at Salesforce Research, utilizing deep learning, language modeling, and computer vision. Most notably, Ali was the architect of the ProGen moonshot, which demonstrated the first demonstration of large language models, LLMs, for functional protein design. Ali, the floor is yours.
Great. Thanks for the opportunity. And it's great hearing from other speakers as well and learning from them as well. My apologies if I was in and out a bit. I was in the Baker Labs and I feel like the internet was in and out all day long for some reason. So I'm actually taking this call from home. I can give a little bit about the journey I've been on specifically in building Profluent, and then I'll end with a little kind of bullet list of takeaways that came to mind when I was thinking about this, but really open to any questions and thoughts from the group as a whole, and would love to prioritize that actually. In terms of my journey, I've pretty much kind of lived and breathed startups along different stages, but it's particularly on the early stage. I've worked for pre-seed, seed, Series A level startups. I had worked at a startup before working on aerial imaging, where we actually bought planes and hooked up cameras and did aerial imaging of Napa Valley and different cities with high frequency resolution mapping and doing computer vision. Worked at a different startup doing point of care diagnostics, which was really interesting as well. I went back to my PhD actually, and was more on the machine learning side in computer vision and natural language processing. Along that way, I worked within healthcare on digital health applications, taking clinical notes and predicting diagnosis codes and billing codes, which was a foundation of the first startup that I founded, which was definitely really interesting. And as a machine learning scientist, I thought that, okay, I had, a really well casted problem for my technology, as a technologist, right? Where you have an input, you have a set number of categories for prediction, you should insert some machine learning, and that's going to be immediate value, and that's the foundation of the startup. What I quickly realized along the way is that there are many other challenges that were blockers and gatekeepers for that problem. And machine learning wasn't really central to the solution. If anything, it only provided marginal value, some incremental value. So from that experience, I actually went back into research, joined Salesforce Research at the time, where we were working on natural language processing techniques and specifically working on controllable sequence generation. So the ability to generate fluent text that's grammatically correct, and we had levers at our disposal for text generation that abide by stylistic tokens or other conditioning tags that came to mind. So this is pre-ChatGPT, pre-GPT-2, and so on and so forth. So I think I was really, I had a kind of similar moment that many folks have today about 4 to 5 years ago, where I was like, okay, this technology is actually, this area of research that we were working on, it really had legs. It was actually working. And we were thinking more deeply about like, what were the recipes for success for this, and what other domains you could apply this to. I always was kind of seeking problems that I really would care about, in terms of, it would be the kind of nexus of the complexity of the problem really necessitates the usage of deep learning and machine learning techniques. And there was some underlying, like, the outcome of those techniques in particular would drive some meaningful impact in society. It wouldn't just be like advertisement optimization in big tech, for example. So we actually went from learning the language of human languages, like English text, to instead learning the language of protein sequences for a variety of different reasons. It was an attractive first domain to tackle, and again, like, it wasn't, the intention was not to start a startup. The intention was to do interesting work, interesting research, and tackle a really fundamental and foundational problems in science, with lots of applications across multiple verticals, really, and really societal benefit. From there, we continued to train very large language models on protein sequences. We got to the point of, for natural language text, you can really easily read the text and check if it's fluent, for example. But for protein sequences, you can't necessarily do that. So what we quickly realized is that we actually had to pair with cell biologists and biophysicists to test these proteins in the real world. And I think that was incredibly important for us, because once we started working with folks in academia and UCSF and Stanford and industry and biopharma, I really got exposure in terms of understanding the problems and the intuitions as to how to solve these problems. And it really influenced kind of the direction that I took in terms of the tasks and the problem kind of formulations that I wanted to tackle with machine learning in particular. So from there, we generated proteins, showed that they were functional in the wet lab, published some papers in machine learning conferences, and some Nature Biotech and a couple other general scientific venues. From my perspective, I initially thought that, okay, as a research scientist, I was generally a cautious optimist with respect to the translatability of techniques from research to clinical impact, right? Or like real world impact altogether. But I think what was surprising for us is that the proteins we were generating they were working. The hit rates were really high. The proportion of those proteins as compared to nature was quite high across multiple diverse protein families. And also the level of functionality as well was exceedingly high. It rivaled that of exemplar proteins that people know very well that have had millions of years of evolution to reach that level of functionality. And I think that was the point basically where on my personal journey where I had to decide between, okay, do I continue to publish papers, which there's lots to be done there, or is this really ready for the prime time to go after really challenging problems that we face as a society? And I chose the latter, and that was really the beginning of Profluent. So we're a seed stage startup in particular. We raised our round last year, basically 1 year ago in particular. We've been building ever since. I think generally speaking, maybe going to like takeaways or thoughts that came to mind particularly, I think generally like I just wouldn't be enamored by building a startup. Building a startup is incredibly hard. It takes away, all of your life basically from other activities. If your goal is to just start a startup for the sake of starting a startup, or you're really enamored by it, you're doing it for the wrong reasons. I think you should really pick a problem that you are truly passionate about. And I know that sounds cliche, but like it is true advice here. And if you don't have a problem that you're really passionate about, right? A problem that you would love to think about all day long, basically, during the day, in the shower, on the weekends, for example. If you don't have that problem you're super passionate about, then go work for someone who does have that problem that they're very passionate about, because those are the institutions where you can learn a lot. You can work with a team specifically that you can really learn and propel your career forward. So that's one main advice that comes to mind here. Like, only start a startup for something that you really are passionate about, and if not, there's plenty of other people and other institutions that you can have a really great experience and develop your career even further. That I advise. Another is don't focus on outcomes, just focus on the process. I think this is really true with respect to just personal life and also startups as well. There's going to be tons of ups and downs. And if you are just tying your happiness to this one outcome of like, okay, when I raise this massive round or I get this great experimental result, you're just going to have a miserable time up until that point, and it likely won't even happen, right? But if you focus on the process and enjoying that process and learning and getting better along the process, then you become stable through the ups and downs, and you can have a good trajectory going forward. So focus on the process, not on outcomes. That's the big kind of takeaway for me personally. I think another is also speed and learning should be the priority. I wouldn't focus too much on your first deal. Your first deal is never your best deal. I wouldn't sweat the differences there. I think what you should optimize for is like, how do I move as fast as possible? How do I really iterate and have those cycles basically of learning be as quick as possible, basically, not sacrificing quality, obviously, but I think speed and learning for a startup is incredibly important, and that's what's really unique for startups versus like working in large pharma or large corporations, and so you should really tackle that, or like grab that by the reins, so to speak. I think what was mentioned earlier about like hiring slow, I think that's really important. Finding the right people that are a combination of multiple factors. There will be lots of people who are great and smart, could be your friends as well, but they just might not be the right fit, right? I think it's just being very judicious with respect to how you go about hiring. And you never really know how hiring will evolve over time. There may be certain roles that eventually you can find the right match for in particular, but I think you have to really think each hire at a time. I think especially the first 10 hires, they really shape the culture, they really shape the vision of the startup itself. So I would go very slow and judiciously, and use your advisors as well to your benefit. And then maybe some small things here with respect to like raising money in VC capital. I would say try to raise with a steady valuation trajectory if you can. Now, right now is a difficult funding climate for most folks, except in AI, I would argue, or most people will know. But if you can afford to do this, I would try not to make massive leaps, but instead take like smaller leapfrogs along the way between your different rounds. It can mitigate risk. It can show progress, a track record, which is good. And lastly, early stage capital really sets the stage for a lot of things downstream with respect to terms and precedent, dilution, and there is a bit of asymmetry with respect to you and VCs, right? VCs, that's their day job. They're looking for those deals. That's what they're trained to do and honed in on. Whereas what you're honed in on is probably the science and learning how to build this startup, right? And building product. So you don't have that much practice. There's asymmetry of information. So I would, and those early stages can really, set the foundation in potentially a really great way or a really bad way. So what I would suggest, for example, is either advisors, other former founders or current founders, or if you don't have that network, I would say YC, Y Combinator has a lot of really great resources, and they're specifically tailored for early stage startups in particular. They're all online, and you can read them, and they're pretty good, honestly. So you don't have to get into YC. You can just read them online. So that's maybe another one as well. So I'll take a pause there, or I'll stop there. So
that is a lot of great advice, Ali. Thank you so much. I want to go back to one thing you mentioned about honing in on research. Like as scientists, we are trained to do research and not building products really. And sometimes as founder, you get caught in that cycle as opposed to commercializing. How do you train yourself and your brain to think about commercializing as opposed to just like publishing and solving problems? That's what we are trained to do. And I think I've heard that story from a number of founders that VCs are not happy about, and then they label PhDs as like not good founders. I'm trying to change that. How did you convince yourself and the investors when it comes to that?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. Having this like minimum viable products or MVP kind of mentality is incredibly important. As a researcher, your PhD is dedicated to asking good questions, right? That's the goal, right? And exploring, it's more exploratory. Yeah, for startups, like you really have to just constantly go in this exercise of like, okay, what's really the minimum stuff I need to do? Like what's to really get this ball across, to really show what's that one takeaway I want on that slide, for example, or one thing I want to say is a strength that I can kind of rest myself, like my argument and build from there specifically. So I think that's definitely true. I don't think it's necessarily completely out of the box for PhDs or academics specifically, right? Like I think when you're writing a good paper, for example, you have to think about this too. Like, what are the key takeaways? Maybe before the paper, for example, you're exploring, you're answering, you're doing your kind of fundamental research, and you're exploring a lot of things. But when it comes down to writing a paper, you also have to start thinking about like distillation with respect to that as well. So I don't think it's like a completely different skill set, but it's something that you do need to hone as an academic, and it's not easy. So
yeah. Any mistakes that people could avoid that you have done unintentionally? Hindsight?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's probably a good amount. I think what's really, I think more generally is just kind of knowing your susceptibilities is important. And like when you hear advice from folks, yeah, I think like at the end of the day, you have to like contextualize other people's advice, even my own advice with respect to your own susceptibilities, right? So I think one thing early on was, I was a little bit driven by fear a little bit sometimes, and like fear of the market, for example, going up and down, and maybe we should just take this term sheet because we have to, for example. Like I think it's generally not good to operate based on fear. And I think that kind of connects to what I was saying earlier about like just focusing on the process. I think that's generally like my advice about this.
Great. Yeah. I want to open up the floor to the audience here to ask questions. We have a list of questions that were submitted. How do you recommend overcoming issues with information asymmetry while still maintaining credibility over a startup?
If this is addressed to me, I would say information asymmetry with respect to other VCs. Yeah, I think there are resources out there that can help you. So definitely, again, other founders that have recently gone through it in your market specifically, right? Like if you're right in a biotech market and you're building a biotech type of company, the advice from someone in software may not be the most relevant. You still take it or like get their perspective, but try to find other founders within your industry that have recently raised. I think they would know a lot. If you were really getting down to like, the terms and conditions and valuations, I think university has like a pitch book subscription, for example. You can look at that, look at other kind of startups, what their valuations were, how much dilution they took, for example. I alluded to YC resources that are good too. Yeah, I think, and I think generally speaking, making sure that you're talking to more than one person and running a competitive process is important too, because if someone is going to lowball you, you'll eventually find that out if you're talking to multiple folks. So yeah.
I was wondering how you thought about like building a moat in the generative AI space and also like how you think about patenting like sequences and sort of like those issues. Maybe Leila also has some opinions on that.
Yeah, definitely defer to others on the patenting side as well. But I would say on the moat side, I think what are real moats, algorithms are not real moats. Inevitably, at least in machine learning, the field will catch up. I think what are real moats are people, data, momentum. These are real moats, right? So on the data side, and data includes like the curation of data and alignment of data for your prediction or generation tasks. So I think those are real. That's definitely a real moat, and you should have any AI startup or any machine learning company has to have a very clear strategy with respect to data. And on the people side, if you think about it with respect to like OpenAI, for example, like they again like name one paper that was fundamental to their success that was a novel architecture or something of that sort. They're using transformers, they're using existing techniques, for example, but they had really great people, and they continue to have a really like amazing talent base, and that's huge. And lastly, with respect to momentum, there's something to be said with respect to momentum. So just being ahead at the time, it's something that you could lose over time, or if you got all the customers within a given space, there is a bit of a moat that does emerge with respect to that too. But I would say data people probably go first before that. Yeah.
Thanks.
Any other questions? I just had to plug in one question about hiring. It's a make or break for many startups, both to Ali and Yana. If there is a question that you ask or to hire somebody, a make or break, what is that?
That's a tough one. It depends who are you hiring. We just hired molecular biologists, and we've been curious what her practical skills are, and we talked pretty much a lot with the references she provided, because we wanted to make sure she can actually work in the lab and work with the samples we plan to work with. So there is no one general question I will ask to anyone. It really depends on the specialty.
Okay. Ali, anything from your end? Any question that is key to you to hire somebody?
Ooh, that's hard, honestly. So the question is like how to discern basically the right hire.
Yeah.
It's a lot of factors that come to mind. I think you definitely want people that are smart. You definitely want people that are hardworking, that believe in your mission, that are passionate about what you're doing. But there's an element of also fit as well. You need to have the right role specifically. I know there is a hiring philosophy of like, if someone's really great, just hire them, you'll figure it out. It's a little bit harder in deep tech startups to take that philosophy. So it's quite a lot. I think one understated aspect is specifically, again, like the first like 10 hires, especially create the core of your company and the culture of your company. And whenever you go out for the next fundraise as well, you are going to be pretty much away from the company at that point. And they've now taken the reign, basically, and continuing the momentum. So you will really like thank yourself in the future if you hire the right people early on. So it's super pivotal. The first hires are incredibly pivotal.
Lale, any observations from you, from the startups you have seen?
For us, we don't, that's beyond what we take a look at. So the only experience I have is I was one of the very first hires in one of the startups that I worked at. And it is really, really important that that the fit be there. The other one is, I cannot say enough how much fit is important. When we talk with VCs, that's the very first question, the very first concern they have. We need to have a good set of people there, and including, a very good VC that is, a very good CEO that's willing to listen, right? So the people need to be good, and they need to be a good fit with each other, and also be willing to listen.
Willing to listen, I think, is a funny thing because, most of the CEOs, they are CEOs because they don't want to go to a big corporation and listen to somebody. And what should they listen to? If somebody's trying to become a CEO and they don't want to be stamped, it's easy. People label them as like, oh, this belligerent, they're not going to listen. Maybe they had an idea that was different, that nobody else is seeking. How to train as a CEO to be a good listener in this particular point?
I have no idea.
Yana, maybe
that's a difficult question and a very important one, right? Yeah. One needs to be, but willing to listen. So if a VC is coming along, right, you need to, and you are the founder or you're the CEO, and you're seeking money from the VC, understand what they're also, because the VC probably is not a first-time VC. They probably have put money into others too, right? Yeah. So be willing to listen. There's of the startups that we have that I know, right? Many of them have lost their CEOs through the first or second round of funding, because the VCs come along, the VCs are not super excited, and they will not put money in unless the C-suite gets changed, right? And many of them go through that. However, that said, I also have had startups, a couple of startups where the entire original C-suite has stayed, and they've done really, really well.
Yeah. Yana, any experiences from your end? Because I heard...
I think...
Go ahead. Sorry. I just want to plug in one. I heard an on-campus accelerator that stamped 2 female founders as like, oh, they don't listen. And it was just like very discouraging to hear at that point, but their perspectives.
I think it's hard to be a CEO if you can't listen, tell the truth, because there are so many people you're responsible for, and you need to, listen to your VCs because you need to keep them happy, and you need to constantly update them and actually, justify their investment. And also you need to listen to your customers because you're building a product for them. You actually need to build something they really want, they really will benefit from. You need to listen to your stakeholders, you need to listen to your advisors, but it doesn't mean that you need to take every advice and bring it to action and actually listen to every advice, but you need to analyze it. You need to make notes, and you need to remember everything each stakeholder told you on the road.
That's fair. Ollie, any input from you?
I guess I'm forgetting the original question, but I want to actually build on what was said earlier. I completely agree with that. I think there's so many stakeholders, so many different parties. What I would say personally to prioritize is your customers or partners, depending on what your business model is, and then your team, Really, those are the two main ones. I would actually avoid investors that require a lot of stakeholder management, right? Like I think you would want investors in particular that are going to help you and almost, that are support you. Obviously, you don't want to come off like not prepared and uncollected and whatnot, but you have a lot to do as a founder in terms of building. So you don't want them to be a burden. So I would really, really hone in on specifically customers and your team members in particular.
Great. Thank you so much. I think we're at the top of the hour. And I want to thank you, all the speakers, Yana, Ali, and Lale. You've been very patient and you shared a lot of information. I'm sure the audience has benefited from your advice. I want to thank UC Berkeley, the VSPA, and the Office of the Vice Chancellor for Research, and IPRA, all the partners that have been helping us over the years. It has been running because of fantastic team members that I've mentioned earlier and speakers like yourself. We want you to keep coming back. And thank you so much for your evening.